who are we? CCLA difference what? Difference makers.
On your own. This first example is which of these two examples is systematic phonics instruction? So in example one, Mrs. Jones is reading a book aloud to her students and notices a lot of words that have the A sound. Even though she hasn't taught the short and long A sounds yet, she mentions that A says the long A sound. So think to yourself, is that an example of structured literacy or systematic phonics or not? The second example, Mrs. Smith teaches a brief phonics lesson every day. She teaches all of the short vowel sounds first and then the long vowel sounds. She has students say the sounds and practice them in connected text. So is that one systematic explicit phonics instruction or not? So in the first example, Mrs. Jones is having the students notice what's in text. And this implicit kind of support is valuable and helpful because she's having kids attend to what they're seeing in texts, but it's not systematic and explicit. So I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm saying that that is additional support. It is not the explicit systematic instruction that we're looking for. In the example with Miss Smith, she's teaching phonics every day, going from what's easier to what's more difficult, and she's having kids practice those sounds, then she's having them using them in text. She can also, again, point out the sounds that she's been working on in her lessons as she's doing read alouds or as she's reading other books. But she has provided that systematic instruction so that when she gets to that sound, kids know what that A sound is. They know what to expect. They know what letters to look for. That's been something they've been exposed to before. So rather than kind of coming out of the blue in the middle of a different lesson, they are ready for it. They've been prepared. Here's another example that relates more to language comprehension. So in example one, Mr. Stevens explains that a summary typically includes the who or what and the most important thing about the who or what. He then reads a few short paragraphs and gives examples of a summary statement. Next, he reads a few short paragraphs and asks students to try with his help. Finally, he asks students to try on their own. Example or non-example of explicit comprehension instruction. In example two, Mrs. Andrews reads a book with her students and stops to ask questions along the way. On one page, she asks students who the main character is, and on another page, she asks what happened to the main character. After she reads the story, she asks students questions about what they liked or did not like about the story. Example or non-example. So in the first example, that's going to be our explicit comprehension instruction because the teacher has told students what he wants them to do. He's let them know exactly how to do it. He's modeled it for them. He's guided some support of trying it out. And then finally, he's had them try on their own. The second example is more of that implicit instruction, where we're asking kids to attend to things as we're reading with them, but we're not doing it in a systematic way. Kids might not connect the dots between who the main character is, what happened to the main character, and then a summary later on when we're asking them to summarize text. And that implicit attention is well-meaning, but it's not giving the kids the tools that they need to actually build up to the skills that we're asking them to do. So I have a couple of examples. This is an example that happens to be free, which is why I'm showing you this one. This is the UFly or University of Florida literacy curriculum that is very systematic. How do I know it's systematic? It has a scope and sequence. This one's from K2 that shows exactly how they're starting out and building on teaching certain letters, teaching certain components of language, and building up to more and more difficult and complex components. What a lesson plan looks like. Each lesson has lots of opportunities for kids to practice things that they've already learned. But then when they introduce a new concept, oh, thank you. When they introduce a new concept, there is explicit instruction. This is the letter, it is a vowel. You know the name already. Let's connect with what we know. The teacher has an articulatory gesture, so she shows how to make that sound. And then after she's done some modeling of how to say the sound, she has the students try. Then she gives them some opportunities to practice. So she has some I do's, some we do's, and then she'll have some independent practice later. So this is a very structured, explicit approach to supporting phonics. Here's an example. I'm going to show you a video so you can see it in action. of systematic and explicit phonics instruction.
The final step in teaching students the alphabetic principle is connecting awareness of how words are segmented into sounds with knowledge of different letter-sound relationships.
We're going to spell some words that are made up of sounds that we've already learned, and you're going to use your sound box and your letters to do that. So when we're working, first we're going to say the word, then we're going to stretch the word holding up one finger for each sound. Then we're going to move the letters into the sound boxes for each sound. We'll touch each letter, and then we'll read the word. Some of the words will only have 3 sounds, so we'll just leave the last one blank. Okay, so watch my example and listen. The first word I'm going to do is dug. The excavator dug a hole at the construction site. So first I'm going to say it, dug. Then I'm going to do it with my fingers. Ugh. Then I'm going to move it. You just watch. Ugh. I'll touch the letters as I make the sounds. Ugh. And then when I read the whole word, I'll do my finger under it. Dug. Okay. You can still just watch. Now I'm going to change one letter to change dug to dig. So look at my letters here. Raise your hand if you can tell me, what letter do you think I should change to make dug turn into dig? Raise.
Change the U into an I.
Okay, so I'm going to take the U away and put the I in the middle. So let's all say dig.
Dig.
Let's sound it.
Dig.
Now say the sound as I touch it.
Dig.
And now let's say the whole word.
Dig.
Good. So now it's going to be your turn. We're going to start with a new word. I'm going to put mine away. Your first word is mud. So say mud.
Mud.
Like the pigs rolled in the mud to stay cool. So let's stretch it out.
D.
Let's do it one more time with our fingers.
D.
Now you move the letters to make the word mud. Now let's touch the letters like they say the sounds. And now do your finger underneath it and say the whole word.
Mud.
Awesome job making the word mud. Now you're going to change one letter to change mud into mug. Like you drank hot chocolate from a mug.
Okay, we'll stop there. But what you can see in this video is that the teacher has taught the children a strategy for reading words. She's modeled it, she's guided that practice, and now she's having them do some on their own so that she can watch how they're doing and intervene if she needs to. So that's a very systematic and explicit approach that can be done at whole class, and then again in a small group for additional support for kids who might need that differentiated instruction. There we go. Okay. I also wanted to show you an example for language comprehension. So this is from a curriculum I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but this is for reading text either aloud or with students. And in this one, this lesson plan, we have pre-reading discussion where kids are given information about vocabulary words that they're going to see in the text. They're given during reading instruction where the teacher is asking questions about those words and comprehension checkpoints to make sure they're understanding. And then there's going to be a post-reading discussion that connects back to the words that they are learning about. So this would be an example of a structured literacy lesson plan that focuses on vocabulary in the context of a read aloud or a read together type of text. And here's an example from a video.
Read an article and retell the story of a butterfly's life. Remember, when we retell stories, we tell the important parts that happen in the order that they happen in. This is A Butterfly's Life by Linda Ruggieri. Butterflies are beautiful insects. You often see them around colorful flowers. A butterfly's life begins in a special way. What happens in the beginning of a butterfly's life cycle? Addie?
The mother lays an egg,
What else can you add to the beginning of a butterfly's life cycle, Christopher?
The color pickers start even and
The mother butterfly lays an egg and it hatches. What happens in the middle of a butterfly's life cycle? Nevaeh?
it comes in it's a caterpillar and it eats leaves and it eats leaves until it's getting bigger and bigger.
And then what happens? Who can add to what Nevaeh has shared? Bobby?
That at at then a butterfly turns into a chrysalis and then it goes out of the chrysalis and then has a brand new life.
The butterfly turns into the chrysalis?
No, it builds a chrysalis and then it goes.
What does it become first before it builds the chrysalis? Thank you. So it does, it builds the chrysalis, and then what happens at the end of a butterfly's life cycle?
We'll stop there, but in this example, the teacher has walked them through beginning, middle, and end. She's taught them that. She's modeled that beforehand. Here's the guided practice part where she's walking them through how to do this. And then the kids are going to apply this to another life cycle. So where they're starting to get a sense of beginning, middle, and end. And that's a structure that they can apply to different kinds of texts. And so she's giving them a framework and a format for being able to retell or summarize what they're reading. Okay, so I'm going to give you a second to turn and talk or stop and jot because we're in a hybrid context. I didn't want to have too much activity, but I wanted to give you a moment to think about to what extent does the curriculum you use or you have in your district align with this kind of tier 1 literacy instruction. I also provide a resource here that you can access if you're interested in actually doing an evaluation of your curriculum. And if there are gaps that need to be addressed, what supplemental programs or materials could you access to fill those gaps, or what steps could you take to fill those gaps? So either turn and talk with someone or stop and jot. Think about that. We'll take about 3 minutes to reflect on that. All right, let's come back together. So now we're going to move towards, all right, what are we thinking about and how we differentiate literacy instruction for the variety of children that we have in our classrooms. So we know that there are kids with lots of different strengths and needs, lots of different backgrounds, languages, abilities. So we want to think about cultural, oh, sorry. I don't know why it's doing that either. It's all right. Just keep letting me know.
In the wiring.
No problem, just let me know. So we're going to be thinking about cultural diversity, linguistic diversity, and ability diversity when we think about how to support our diverse learners in our classrooms. So this is nothing new to any of you, but linguistic diversity is increasing rapidly in the US. We have many different languages represented. Spanish is the most common in terms of second languages or first languages spoken by children in our classrooms. And we just know that this diversity is growing. And so this is something that we want to be thinking about, is how we attend to linguistic diversity in our classrooms. So when we think about Tier 1 instruction for multilingual learners, we have two prongs, again, that we're going to be thinking about. One is code-focused instruction, and the other is meaning-focused instruction. And there's slightly different strategies or approaches that we might take with each of those different skill sets. So for code-focused instruction, things that we want to do are we want to highlight similarities in sounds across students' home languages in English. So I know Spanish best, so I'll use those examples, but the sound for S is similar in English and Spanish. That's something that kids can transfer across languages. If they know it in one language, they can use it in the other language. So we want to highlight that. You already know this to kind of give kids that asset-based instruction. But we want to provide additional support for sounds that are different across our languages. For example, in Spanish, the SH is not a sound that's commonly used except for in foreign words typically. And so that's a sound that we might practice additionally or extra or highlight. We might do additional support for understanding how to make that sound, how that sound looks in our mouth, how that sound feels, so that they have more practice with that sound because it's not a sound that they might be familiar with. We're going to compare similar and different syllable patterns across languages. So for example, the word dame in English follows a simple consonant, vowel, consonant E type pattern. So we make a long A sound. But in Spanish, that would be dame. So we have a different way of pronouncing that word. And so we need to learn that we're using a different syllable structure here. So we can kind of make those comparisons across the languages. We're also going to make sure that students know the meanings of words in code-focused instruction. I mean, this is really for multilingual learners, broadly defined as all of us, because when we don't know the words, it's harder for us to connect to it. So for example, if I teach the word hen and you have no idea what a hen is, it's going to be harder for you to connect the three sounds that I'm trying to teach you to combine together because that has no representation of a real word in your mind. So when I'm teaching my words, even very simple words like hen, I'm going to make sure you know what they mean. And so that you can hold on to that or use your mental Velcro to be able to connect to your word meaning as well. And then we're going to provide ample opportunities for practice to develop fluency. And this might be more important for multilingual learners because they're learning to do these skills in a different language. And so that's an additionally complex task. We add all of those things that we notice were hard about reading, and we add that we're doing this across languages. So we want to give lots of opportunities for practice and support. In meaning-focused instruction, that's kind of a different bucket of skills. So we're going to be thinking about that in a slightly different way. We're going to be attending to background and content knowledge and cultural relevance. There might be some things that students haven't had exposure to because maybe they're a recent immigrant and this is a very US-centric type thing that we're talking about. And so we want to share with them what background knowledge is relevant to the text that we're reading. We also want to ask them about their background knowledge. What do they know and can bring to the text that we might not have exposure to or understand? We want to spend additional time teaching vocabulary. Vocabulary is one of the hardest things for multilingual learners because vocabulary, there are so many words that we need to know in language to be able to comprehend. It's one of the hardest skills, and it's one of the hardest skills to transfer across languages. We are able to leverage cognates for languages that sound similar and have similar spellings across some words. Not all words will do that, but there are some words that are spelled and sound similarly and mean the same thing across languages. So we want to leverage those opportunities for kids to transfer what they do know from their home language to English. We also want to think about cross-linguistic morphological awareness. So a word part like re means the same thing in both languages, Spanish and English. We can support kids by helping them transfer what they already know in one language to the other language. Again, we're going to provide additional time for processing and discussing texts. They'll need more time because they need to do that work across languages. And so we want to give them lots of space and time to be able to do that additional cognitive load or be able to manage that additional cognitive load. And then finally, we want to promote translation and translanguaging. So with translation, we want them to be able to use what they already know in their home language to bring that into the classroom to support their comprehension. By asking kids to keep what they already know at home, that's just silly. We want them to bring what they already know into the classroom and build on it. Also, we want them to be able to translanguage. So that means using all of their languages, whether it's their formal languages like English and Spanish, or even their informal languages like how they talk on their playground. Those kinds of languages help kids, allowing those kinds of languages allow kids to use everything that they know about language and about the world to make meaning. And we can help them transfer that to this is how it looks in a text, this is how it would look in formal writing, but we want to make sure that they know that they can bring all of those assets into the classroom. We want to think about how we can support the multilingual ecology in the classroom. And so this is important for teachers that don't necessarily speak the other languages that their kids speak, is that there's lots of ways to do this that don't require knowing those other languages. So for example, you could hang bilingual posters and signs. Just by having those in the classroom, it shows kids that their other languages are welcome. We can create cognate charts on the walls, and that doesn't mean that I need to know them. I can look them up on sites like Coloring Colorado, that has sites of cognates that we can access. We can have books in versions that are in English and in home languages, so kids know that, again, their languages are invited into the classroom. We can have opportunities for kids to use resources like bilingual picture dictionaries or use technology to support translation across their languages. We can also have listening centers or using technology for audiobooks that are in both languages, so students are able to transfer what they can learn in one language to another language. And most importantly, we don't want to hold content. Just because kids are learning to navigate across languages, we don't want to reserve content for them. So we want to have them access the highest content that they can access through things like videos, so through things like audiobooks, other ways for them to be able to access information in their home language and in English, so that they are learning the content that they need for that background knowledge to comprehend text. In the program that I am talking a little bit about today as one example, again, I'm only sharing free curricula with you. This one's called the Claves curriculum. And in this curriculum, what the principles that we rely on for multilingual learners are, we focus on metalinguistic awareness. So we know that language is a barrier for multilingual learners who haven't had support. So what we do is we target semantics, syntax, morphology through explicit instruction and encourage to reflect on and manipulate language. So that additional metalinguistic support can help multilingual learners understand the language of the text that we're working with. We also enact dialogic approaches to engage students. We encourage student talk. So we try to step back and facilitate discussion about language and text that generates meaning and understanding. This might come after we've explicitly taught some background knowledge and some comprehension strategies and some vocabulary words, but then we want to give them a chance to talk about them and process them and be able to share with each other how they're understanding the texts. We use multimodality to support comprehension and expression. So we employ print and video, gesturing, acting, movement to facilitate students' meaning making. So for example, when we're teaching a text, we have a picture book text, a print text like a Newsella type article, and a video, all kind of in a quote unquote text set, a multimodal text set, so that kids can access the information in different ways. And then finally, we leverage multilingualism. So rather than, again, telling kids to keep their language at home, we invite them to bring in their full linguistic repertoire, compare and contrast across languages. Even if we don't know the language, we can do something as simple as, do you know the word in your other language? Or how would you say this in your other language? Or we can pair students with children who speak the same home languages as them so that they can talk about the text and help each other make process and make sense of what they're learning. Here's an example of a curriculum that you can use for this kind of multilingual work that's called Let's Know. And in this curriculum, they do very explicit and systematic teaching of things like vocabulary words, semantic awareness, how these things are translated into Spanish. We ask kids to talk about things, and we put this in the context of other literacy strategies like inferencing and learning cause and effect. This, again, is a free curriculum you can access online. This is the Claves example. So in this one, which is for older kids, here's an example we teach them about wolf reintegration and that debate topic, and introducing wolves by showing them a picture book. We have, again, a video and a Newsella type article that they read about this topic. We give them some background knowledge about wolf reintroduction. We teach them the vocabulary words that they need. We give them information about word parts. We teach them the Spanish translation of the word, and that's helpful for both Spanish speakers and English learners. I think it's important for English learners to learn other languages and become more sensitive to the range of linguistic diversity that's out there. We connect it back in the text, so it's not just something that's random, but we have them answer questions that are kind of bringing back those words. And we ask them to think about those words in other languages or synonyms for those words in other languages. So even if I only know Spanish and only can make sure that my translation or definitions are accurate in Spanish, they can tell me information that they might know from home. I also can ask parents and other community members to help me with that part of learning the other languages in my classroom. So we talked about linguistic diversity. I want to talk a little bit about cultural diversity. So we know that cultural diversity is closely related to linguistic diversity. The purpose, context, and background experiences all affect how we make sense of language. And these cultural differences are something that we should become aware of and invite students to bring to the classroom so that they can use that cultural knowledge to make sense of what they're learning. This is something that I'm sure you're familiar with, thinking about how we bring literature into the classroom. This is that we use books that are both mirrors of our own lives and making sure that kids see themselves reflected in the text that they're working with. We have windows into other lives and experiences. And then we teach kids how to move back and forth and compare and contrast and use what they know to help them learn additional contexts. And so teachers should consider the ways in which the authors and characters and texts contribute to the inclusion of diverse voices in the classroom, because we know that's going to be a huge part of helping kids feel engaged and motivated to learn in their classrooms. Here's an example from Claves. We have books that are on different topics. We have books that are representing different ethnic, racial identities, different linguistic identities, different topics that kids might be interested in, such as science topics or ecological topics. And so we try to think about that range of interests and background knowledge that we have in our classroom and thinking about how we can connect students' culture. An example from discussions that we have about the book Crown is we have students read the book Crown together, and we have them think about the relationship between hairstyles and identity in that book. We have them look at a video that's the story of Black and Afro-texture hair, and we have them think about how that relates to that question that we're going to ask them to discuss. And then we also have a text on the Crown Act and protecting cultural and ethnic hair identity in California. And so kids use these different sources to think about this question. They're learning words that have to do with like identity, relationship, these important words that are going to apply to lots of different things that they're learning, but also allows them to bring in some background knowledge. How would you feel if somebody told you that you needed to cut your hair? What does that make you feel like? How much is hair part of your identity? And having kids really think about those things and what their culture tells them about things that are important to them in that they can use to understand texts in school. And then finally, I mentioned ability diversity. So we have to remember that we have kids with lots of different neurological backgrounds. We have things that might affect kids' cognitive ability, their social emotional ability, their physical ability, and we want to think about how we're going to include all of them as well. And so students with diverse cognitive and academic abilities need to be engaged in authentic learning so that they can view their learning as meaningful and purposeful. So that what I always turn to in my teacher ed classes when I'm thinking about supporting kids with different abilities is thinking about making sure that all abilities in my classroom are engaged by different means of engagement. So I'm going to engage them in different ways. I'm going to use print text, visual text. I'm going to use videos. I'm going to use different ways of engaging them with information. I'm going to allow them to represent their knowledge in different ways. They can write, they can do a video blog, they can do different ways of showing what they know, different forms of assessment so that it's not always a singular type of assessment that might be difficult for some kids. And then finally, we're going to have different means of action and expression, so ways that they can express themselves through communication. We're going to give them strategies for interacting with each other and ways to communicate their knowledge to other folks. And so these sets of principles, when we think about this in the lesson designing phase, we're thinking about different ways of making sure that all kids have access and all kids can express themselves within the context of our lesson plans. And so with the CLA-based curriculum, we have opportunities for kids to talk. We use visuals. We use workbooks so that kids can actually write things in. We have the chart paper on the wall. We have PowerPoints that we use. We have vocabulary cards that you can see at the top up here. Again, we use videos to engage kids in a different way from the text that they often encounter in schools. We have them write in different ways. So we try to make sure that we're engaging kids in lots of different ways to make sure that kids are included. Importantly, we're also doing this in small groups and in pairs, like one-on-one pairs, because we want kids to be able to have that opportunity to really engage closely with their teacher, as well as to have the opportunity to engage closely with their peers. We know these opportunities are important for building literacy, and the whole class context will give them some background, but it won't help them really develop it in a more meaningful way, as small group instruction and paired instruction can do. So now I'm going to give you another chance to turn and talk or stop and jot about opportunities that your curriculum has to support linguistic, cultural, and ability diversity. And if there are gaps that need to be addressed, what supplemental programs could you access to fill in those gaps, or what steps could you take to fill those gaps? So I'll just give you 1 minute to think about that. Awesome. All right, last section that we have today. So we're going to talk about so all of that we were talking about before is within the context of Tier 1. So those are all the strategies, the content, the differentiation that needs to happen within Tier 1. Now, what do we do when our kids aren't responding to Tier 1? So importantly, educators must make instructional decisions based on what they know about the scientific research or reading and by analyzing student achievement with data collected throughout the year from various types of assessments. So we're going to use the assess, observe, reflect teaching cycle to plan, teach, assess, plan, teach, assess, in order to think about what our kids need. So here's an example of how this might look. So you know that in California, at least for K2, we're going to be using universal screening across all of our classrooms. And so the first thing that we're going to be thinking about is, are the students showing adequate progress? If yes, then the student is receiving their typical Tier 1 instruction. That includes, thank you. That includes differentiation. So that's the first step. If no, then we're going to be giving them their Tier 1 instruction, but we're going to be closely monitoring their student progress. If the student is not responding adequately to Tier 1 instruction, and we're giving them a short window to see if they're going to respond, especially in our differentiated instruction. So if I'm pulling them for small groups, I'm monitoring, are they quickly responding to small group differentiated instruction? And if they're not, within 4 to 8 weeks, I'm going to be thinking about, okay, do I need to take the next step? If they're responding, they continue to receive their Tier 1 instruction. Maybe they don't need that additional support. But if they're not responding, I might need to think about giving them Tier 2 intervention. Importantly, Tier 2 intervention is over and above what they're doing in whole class and differentiated instruction. That means you're meeting with them in their small group, but you're meeting with them again at another time of day so that they can have additional practice and support. And this is often something that schools need to work on in terms of adapting schedules, adapting resources, making sure that there's time for this additional instruction. But when we think about accelerating learning, we need to have additional support. It's not just replacing the support that they're supposed to be getting at Tier 1. When we deliver Tier 2 instruction, we're going to be monitoring progress and seeing is the student adequately responding. If they're adequately responding, we can use our flexible grouping strategies to have them not receive that additional Tier 2 instruction and just use our differentiated instruction to support their needs. If they're not responding adequately, we might give them another round of Tier 2 instruction, or we might be thinking about Tier 3 instruction, where we're intensifying and going to that one-on-one instruction approach. So when we think about this in the context of our RTI, we're thinking about everybody's getting that whole class core instruction with differentiation. We're also thinking about additional opportunities for Tier 2 instruction that on specific components that are needed that we've identified through assessments. And we're thinking about for whom we need to give that additional intensive support. And that's typically through a reading specialist, an interventionist, a specialist who is dedicated to providing that additional instruction. For Tier 2 intervention, what are we thinking about? What does that look like? We're providing, We're providing intensive systematic instruction on up to 3 foundational skills. The reason why that's capped at 3 is because if we're trying to do everything, we're not going to be giving a lot of attention to any specific thing. To small groups who are scoring below benchmark on universal screening. Typically, these groups meet between 3 and 5 times a week for 20 to 40 minutes, again, in addition to their Tier 1 instruction. We're also going to be monitoring these students more frequently. So while we might only be monitoring the whole class 3 times a year, we're going to be monitoring students in Tier 2 at least monthly and trying to understand, are they responding to that instruction? What does Tier 3 look like? How is that different? That intervention is going to be daily, at least 4 to 5 times a week. We're going to be thinking about the components that the students need, and this is going to be much more individualized, thinking about the specific strengths and needs that the children have based on our assessment data. What do we mean by this Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction? What do we do? How is it different from regular differentiated instruction? Well, I already talked about increasing learning time. So we're going to have additional opportunities for kids to learn. We're going to reduce the group size. So while in my differentiated instruction groups, I might have like 5 or 6 kids, in my Tier 2 groups, I'm going to have more like 3 kids. I'm going to provide instruction with additional modeling. So I'm going to make sure I spend extra time there so that kids really understand what I'm asking them to do and how to do it. I'm going to be, since I've only have a few kids in that additional time, I can really check and monitor what the kids are doing and give them corrective feedback immediately. I'm able to give that more personalized feedback when I only have that small group and that extra time committed to doing this. We're going to have students demonstrate what they're doing so we can see and also intervene as we need to. We're going to have students repeat the instructions so that they know that we know that they know what we're asking them to do and can make sure that we're being clear and that they're understanding what they're asking them to do. We're going to give them multiple examples and practice opportunities. So while in my tier 1 instruction, I might have given like 3 to 6 examples, here I might give 6 to 10 examples before I have them do additional independent practice. And for practice, I'm going to give them additional examples. I want to make sure that they have lots and lots of opportunities for practice and feedback. That corrective feedback that I'm giving to individual students is going to be very specific and very individualized. So just because I have 3 kids in the group doesn't mean they're all 3 getting the same kinds of feedback. I'm going to give them feedback individually on what each of them needs based on what I'm seeing them doing and what my assessments are telling me they're doing. And then finally, I'm going to provide them cognitive supports. This is like examples and non-examples, like I showed you earlier, so that kids can really understand, as well as strategies for working through what they're learning. So what does this look like in like regular instruction? So an example of tier 1 to tier 2 instruction. In tier 1, let's say that we have a phonics lesson. The teacher is introducing blending by telling students they will tap, say, and blend sounds. This is similar to the video that we watched. The teacher is going to model with the words mat and red. And then the teacher is going to guide student practice with pet, rat, and sap. The teacher is going to differentiate in groups. So this is kind of a big message that I have is that tier 1 still includes differentiation. So I'm going to differentiate with some groups that are going to stick with those 3-letter words that I'm teaching in my lesson. Other groups, I might only do 2-letter words because they need to step back a step, make sure they really can do a shorter blending activity. I might do longer words with kids who have quickly gotten those 3-letter words. So I'm going to think about how my instruction might differentiate within my small groups. For kids who are not responding to that, so I've done my whole class and I've done my differentiated instruction, what am I going to do differently when I have them for a second time that day where I'm pulling them out to support them with tier 2? I'm going to review what I've done in my tier 1 lesson and in my small group lesson. So we want to kind of constantly go back to tier 1 and have that connection to tier 1. We're going to provide that extra modeling and practice. We're going to exaggerate the verbal and visual cues to make sure they really get what I'm showing them, because it could be that in either my whole class or my larger group setting, maybe they weren't able to see or attend to what I'm trying to teach them. So I'm going to really exaggerate those cues that I can give them for support. And then I'm going to give them additional opportunities to practice. This will be honed based on where they are, whether that's at the 2 or 3 level, 3-letter words. And I'm going to make sure that we eventually can get them back on track to the rest of the class, which is probably at 4-letter words by the time I've worked with my tier 2 group. And then what are we thinking about when we're thinking about tier 3 intervention? How is that different from tier 2? So here we're thinking about individualized instruction. And often it's a different program that's been validated that includes instructional strategies that are really intensive. So for example, it could be hour-long lessons where we're really intensively focusing on a couple of skills with highly frequent monitoring, weekly or every other week. This instruction is typically delivered in addition to core instruction and outside the general education classroom by someone who's specialized in providing and designing individualized interventions. So this is often something where we think about MTSS and the systems we need to have in place, is those additional personnel and resources that we need to have in school buildings to support tier 3 intervention. Depending on the school's RTI plan, tier 3 might be implemented using services in general education. So that might be like a reading specialist, for example, or special education. And this is at the point where a student has an IEP. If tier 2 instruction occurs in the general education context and students continue to struggle in reading, you don't want to withhold tier 3 intervention. We want to start that as soon as possible. But in the meantime, we want to think about special education referral and having the student further assessed so we can understand what's going on with this kiddo, what are the things that they may need additional support with. So I want you to think about, for our last stop and jot, what are the tier 2 and tier 3 supports that you have in your buildings? And if there are gaps that you need to have addressed, what are the things that you should be thinking about in terms of addressing those gaps? All right. So then to wrap up, before we open up to some questions, I just want to really highlight that all of this work involves teams. This should not, oh, involves teams. We should not be thinking about this as falling on any single teacher. This is a group effort, whether it be at grade level instructional teams, at the student support teams in schools that include reading specialists, interventionists, special educators, English learner support services. We want all of these folks supporting each other because we know that kids have lots of different strengths and needs. They come from lots of different diverse backgrounds, needs, abilities, languages, cultures, and we need all of the people in the room to help us think about how we're going to have the most effective tier 1 instruction in literacy that we can possibly have, the most effective differentiation, the most effective tier 2 instruction, and the most important, effective tier 3 instruction for kids who are still struggling even after all of those additional supports. So I want to really highlight the importance of student support teams and thinking about this as a systems approach and getting the whole school on board for using this kind of framework for thinking about literacy. And then importantly, this is a continuous process. Like I said, we've been doing this for years in Maryland before I came to California. And we're still learning in Maryland, we're still learning in California. We have lots of things to learn about how to make this system the most effective possible. So I think as part of that systems level approach, thinking about collecting data on what's working, what's not working, using implementation science to think about how can we make it better, and improvement science to think about how can we make our look at our achievement scores, look at our student scores, and think about how we can actually see improvements for the children. So this is a continuous improvement effort. We're not going to get this right overnight, but we want to constantly be coming back to what we know and what we can work on to make it better for the kids. So I'm going to stop there. We have time for questions and comments, but I do know that you also have another session coming up pretty quickly. So if you don't have questions, it's okay, and you can feel free to go to your next session. Yeah. Yeah. So I try not to advocate for specific programs except for the free ones that I advocate for. But I would say that what I would recommend you doing is I put a link in. I'm going to have these slides for you. I would use the rubric that comes on the science, the reading. Yeah, and I think that will tell you which one is going to be best for you guys. Awesome. Awesome. All right, well, I'm going to make sure that she has a slide deck in case you want those links, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you.